Great. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I am Rose Smith. I'm the Events and Community Manager at Femme Palette, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to the DEI Palette Club event on employee engagement, what, why, and how to improve it. The DEI Palette Club is a community for anyone who is interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. It is a club where people can meet like-minded individuals and learn from each other. This is one of the communities at Femme Palette. Femme Palette is an organization that helps women grow in their careers. Over time, it has started focusing on a more personal approach to career development, such as mentoring programs. You can find out more about the DEI Palette Club and Femme Palette at www.fempalette.com. And it is my absolute pleasure to have here two amazing individuals, Shumailla Dar and Olivia Fromm. Just a little bit about them. Shumailla Dar is the head of equity, diversity, and inclusion at Harrow Council. She is a senior leader specializing in policy, strategy, and workforce development with over 19 years of experience in both central and local government, delivering a range of evidence-based social intervention policies. Shumailla, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for joining us today. Great. And second, we have Olivia Fromm. She is the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Manager at iProov. Liv is a proven leader in diversity, inclusion, and equity in tech and recruitment. She is passionate about amplifying the scope of DEI by increasing education, allyship, and intersectionality on a global scale. Liv, thank you very much for joining us. I know that you're already part of the DEI Palette Club.
Thank you. Thank you. Really excited to be here.
Fantastic. So I have a few questions here to start off the discussion. However, we're going to be opening the floor for questions minutes before the session ends. So if you find yourself having any questions that you'd like to ask specifically to our speakers, feel free to write them on the chat or raise your hand during that portion of the event and you can join the discussion. Fantastic. So without any further ado, let's start off the conversation. I think to start off, it would be really great to establish perhaps a working definition of employee engagement, just to start from the basics, and maybe we could work our way to more complicated issues. So the first question, and maybe Shumailla can begin, what is employee engagement and how does it differ from job satisfaction, and why is employee engagement important in DEI?
Thanks, Rose, and thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for coming along to this discussion. It's great to see so many people today, actually. So I guess employee engagement, and why is it and how is it different to job satisfaction? Employee engagement really is about making sure that every member of staff in an organization is able to feel included and part of the organization. It's about collaboration, it's about co-working, it's about consultation. A lot of the time, organizations do these big staff surveys where they sort of say, right, how do you feel? How do you feel like you're included in the organization, without actually consulting staff on a regular basis, without actually having that two-way dialogue? And you have these annual surveys and they go around and they ask you questions like, can you be your authentic self at work? Do you feel that you get the best job opportunities, etc. But what we don't do is regularly consult staff on an ongoing basis and having that circular kind of conversation that happens all the time. And I would say a good organization that is that recognizes employee engagement recognizes that actually your biggest asset in a workforce is your workforce. The biggest budget that you have is your pay, salary, and actually what better way to actually get the best out of your staff than to ask them. And I think employee engagement is so vital. It is completely different to job satisfaction, employee satisfaction, because it's not just asking staff, how do you feel, or what would you like more of, but it's actually consulting them as part of that process. And the second thing is, often when we think about job satisfaction, for example, we think staff members tend to want to have incentives that are monetary, they're financial, things that they can be rewarded on. But actually what people mostly want is they want to feel like they have a voice at work. They want to feel like they're part of that organization. And I hate the word you're part of the family, because no one's ever felt part of it. I've got my own family, I'm sure everybody else has as well. I hate that term because I just think I come to work, I want to feel part of the organization, but I don't necessarily want to be a family, because I argue with my family, I make up with my family, and we all know where we stand, but that's not necessarily the case at work. So I'd say that's how employee engagement and job satisfaction differ for me. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear what Liv says to that answer, but I would say that's broadly what I would say. That's the difference.
I have to, I'm very much on the same wavelength as you here. I mean, like employee satisfaction or employee engagement is more of like people want to participate and like be part of the success of the workplace. They have like an emotional connection. So they feel towards their work and they feel towards their degree and their teams and the organization itself. So it's more the emotive piece than just showing up, being happy with your job and continuing on. It's really important that you have those one-to-one conversations that you were just speaking about, because it's hearing people's voices and making sure they feel heard within the workplace. So it's that aspect of belonging, which we're all seeking desperately within the workplace, which continues to want to see the success of our peers and the company and the vision as a whole. Like it is absolutely key for the success of DEI that we have employee engagement, because it drives people who want to participate not just in the workplace, but in the events that we're doing and educating one another. And it's really what celebrates ourselves as diverse, inclusive, and different individuals. And it's just key metric that you need in order to have success in this field.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shumailla and Liv. This was a really great start, I believe. I hope that everybody agrees with me. So I guess, well, you two have already been in the field for quite a long time. And so I'm quite curious to know, what was your approach at the beginning with regards to employee engagement when you first started? And did it change? What sort of lessons did you learn along the way? What kind of strategies may have worked or may have not? And what kind of misconceptions about employee engagement did you have after a while and you realized actually, oh, maybe this was not employee engagement? So perhaps we could start with Liv this time.
Absolutely. Well, for me, I love educating. I think that's something that's always been a really big passion for me. So when I was approaching employee engagement, I went the very in-depth educational route. So it's over-educating and over-informing, but really like what it means to be an ally or how to stand alongside others. When it really comes down to it, it's really about lived experience, and which allows us to choose to want to join and find ways in order to participate when it comes to employee engagement. It's listening to one another instead of just kind of shoving all the information down people's throats, which doesn't always click. You want to find things that are engaging and important to everyone instead of just yourself. In my company, we don't have ERGs. And what that means is that we do really rely on surveys and people volunteering this information and coming up for suggestions and the like. So what we've done is we've created a huge all-encompassing ERG. We have a diversity, inclusion, and belonging committee, which has been amazing. And it's where people throughout the entire company get to volunteer and join me on their own and with their own time to help raise awareness and let me know what they need to know educational wise, and then help bring more engagement as a whole throughout the office. And it's been incredibly helpful and successful because people could then share their passions and get others to join in without me being the only one rallying it on. And I also get to learn a lot more about the people that I work with on a day-to-day, and that's really special too.
Perhaps Shumailla, you have a different kind of path towards employee engagement.
Definitely very, very different actually. So I guess my path to employee engagement was much more organic than what Liv has described. And I think I mean we've always had employee resource groups in the council, perhaps not as effective as they have been now, but one event in particular sort of kick-started a real change in my organization, and that was the murder of George Floyd. And I think 2020 was a real turning point for many organizations globally. It was a real wake-up call. We had staff members that were literally ready to sort of leave and put in grievances and all sorts because they were just fed up. They had had enough. There was no voice. There was no route for them to actually talk about some of the anxieties they faced. Watching these images on repeat on the TV was really causing them a lot of harm mentally, and they were feeling really anxious at work. And my kind of approach to how to engage with them was around really being a listening ear. and just giving them the opportunity to speak, without judgment. And a lot of that actually was quite traumatic for them, but it was also really difficult to hear as an organization. And when you're in the center, you've got white senior leaders who are male, who were in the corporate center leading the organization. We had a white male chief executive at the time. These are really difficult discussions to hear. You're institutionally racist, basically. I can't progress at work. And our approach to employee engagement was really just stop, don't talk, don't try to come up with an action plan, don't try to come up with anything that will, try to act as though we know what we're talking about, because we don't know what we're talking about. If we knew, then actually nobody would be saying what they're saying to us at the moment. So we spent a good 6 months just listening. We then brought in an external consultant who did an independent piece of work, and actually came and spoke to staff. So again, we really wanted to hear from staff, what are some of the things that they are talking about. So we have data, we had workforce data that told us, this is what your staff generally look like. This is how many Black staff you have, this is how many women you have, this is how many LGBTQIA plus staff you have. But what we didn't know is what they were saying, what were their challenges, where were some of the opportunities they want. And that piece of work really helped us to identify some of the core values of our organization, which we did not know before, and it was just one of the most enlightening pieces. And I would say one of the things that I learned from that is how important it is to just take stock, to stop and to listen. And listening is such an undervalued skill in leadership, I would say, in D&I, because none of us are experts. I'm sure Liv will agree. We're always learning. Every day I wake up and I think, I thought I knew that, but actually it's totally different. And often you get protected characteristics that are battling against one another. You're like, oh my God, how do we approach this at work? And you kind of think it's such a fine balancing act. And so the art of listening is so important. The art of not speaking, the art of the pause, the art of the reflection is so important in D&I employee engagement, and not to kind of try to come up with solutions quite quickly. And that is one thing that I would say in terms of what lessons have I learned. What I've learned is actually other organizations, other councils, when George Floyd was murdered, they immediately came up with this knee-jerk reaction of, we've got an action plan and this is the 3 things we're going to do. We didn't do that. We said we are not coming up with an action plan. It took us a whole year to come up with that action plan, because first we wanted to consult, involve everybody, involve them in the solution, and then come up with the solution. So I think that's basically the way we approached it. And I think actually we did okay. And as a result, we've got 7 employee resource groups, which have been fantastic. But that's really my approach.
I'm going to add to that. It's like so important that you really participate in active listening, because it's the only way to really make sure that people feel seen and heard within the workplace. Like, I know what intersectional identities I have. I'm not going to have the same with everyone else. So the only way to understand and make sure we have employees properly engaged and be themselves is learning more about everyone and what identities they have themselves, so we can support them for whatever shows up in the media. And you always have to be proactive and reactive. This job consistently changes, and you never know whatever's going to happen in the news tomorrow. So as long as you have a space where people feel like they can speak to you, no matter what, that's absolutely key for employee engagement in the DEI world.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to hear about your own journeys as well, and then the lessons that you learn and that we keep learning. And I think you've already touched upon a few strategies, such as active listening, making it a two-way street communication. But perhaps we have here different kinds of DEI experts, or even people who are not exactly in the field but want to know more about it. So I know it's a very difficult question, since you mentioned that you need to consult and kind of tailor it according to the employees, but perhaps you could give maybe more concrete strategies on perhaps what people can adapt to increase employee engagement, what worked well for you, for example, what didn't. We've heard a little bit about it, but perhaps you could speak more to it. So perhaps we could start with Shumailla this time.
So yeah, I guess strategies to increase employee engagement. The first thing I would start with is trust and confidence. So a measure of trust and confidence is actually how safe do people feel, how psychologically safe do people feel to actually knock on the door and say, there is a problem. And if you're at a point where actually no one's speaking about problems, you have a problem, because it means that you just don't know what those issues are, because all organizations will have staff that are not happy, they're not satisfied, and any organization says that 100% satisfaction, they're wrong. It is not the case, because there's always going to be that small minority or majority that will not have anywhere to go. So the first thing is around psychological safety, and there is no way to kind of get to psychological safety except for being visible. And some of that is about actually being friendly, going out there, speaking to people, making sure that you're investing in your D&I initiatives and the people that are leading that initiative to actually go out and say, the organization has your back. Tell me what your issues are. The second part of that is to have an HR function that works really effectively. So often what we think in organizations, and this has happened in Harrow as well, where there's almost like an illusion of collusion. HR are not here for me. They're here for my managers. They're here for senior leaders. They want to get me out. If I say something, they'll come up with a way to sort of get rid of me. Building trust and confidence in HR is such a crucial component of making sure that we are able to handle this in a way that is positive. So one thing that we've done in Harrow, for example, is working very closely with our HR business partners, and these are the people who do employee relations in the organization, and really trying to make sure that they are on board. So we've done a lot of training with them. We've done a lot of kind of work with them where we are seen to be working with our HR business partners. So it's seen as, right, HR business partners get equality, diversity and inclusion. They're going to want the best for me. And I suppose that's one of the strategies around doing it. The second thing is to make sure that your employee resource groups are involved in some of those corporate senior discussions. So we've always made sure that they have access to the chief executive, that there is no in between, that the chief executive is able to hear some of those very raw conversations, because ultimately it's his decision to make. A lot of the time, he will be able to influence those discussions in ways that other people will not. So giving them a seat at the senior table is also very, very important. So those are two things that, there are a raft of things. I could probably write a book on this, but those are two things that I would say are vital.
I have to agree with you there. It is absolutely key that you make sure that people have a seat at the table, just as you said it. I remember when I was working at Indeed, we had an orange chair in all of our meeting rooms, and that was so we could visualize the candidate for jobs. So we always walked into every meeting thinking, is this the right move for the future candidate for these future jobs? And it's so important that you always think that way, so it's not always your viewpoint for every single thing you do in your day-to-day. I'm really lucky at iProov. We've got a smaller company, so I have been able to have my one-to-ones with most of the workforce, and that allows me to really get people to be engaged and understand what makes people tick. And sometimes the meetings are harder than others, but then I can at least help get them on that path. Like either, oh, maybe this is a conversation you need to have with our HR team, or, oh, have you spoken to our learning and development manager around like some of your professional growth? But it's making sure that they see myself and our team, our HR team, as someone to speak to. And again, as Shumailla said, like it's all about psychological safety and that feeling that you aren't going to be reprimanded for, speaking up. And, if we're hiring people who are younger, also, then we're also educating them to have voices and not feel afraid if this is their first job. So there's a lot of making sure that you're seen, you're willing to have these conversations, you're kind of creating a safe environment where people feel like they belong. I do something called Coffee Chats and Connections once a month. It's right now kind of on hiatus. It's a little dark out in the morning. But when we do it, the important part is we do it in like a hybrid way. So we have people in the States that are able to join and over here, but I'm connecting everyone with someone in the office that might be a good mentor or might be a good peer. And it allows them to find common ground. So they find other people they can be psychologically safe with and get advice from besides just the HR team. So it kind of creates not a family, but a community where we're all really able to support one another. As surveys only really kind of get the baseline, you don't really get to go in depth about what the needs of your employees.
Fantastic. These are really great tips. I'm sure that this has been very, very useful to everybody. I guess the next question would be the more difficult question, which is how can we assess employee engagement? A lot of people are working on it, but then at some point we do want to see measure, and we do want to see whether it's effective or not. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit of tools that you recommend that people could use to kind of assess the employee engagement, or what questions should be asked in surveys. And I guess we'll begin with you, Liv.
Well, I know I said I don't love surveys, but sometimes surveys are a good way to at least start, at least before you kind of go into that one-to-one area. But I'm sure most of us have heard of, there's a company called Culture Amp. And sometimes it's really great to go third party for these sorts of assessments and tools for engagement, as people tend to be more honest that way. We can receive the data that way and really be able to dive into it. But if you aren't able to do that, it's really those one-to-one chats and the anonymous surveys to some degree, to be able to kind of really figure out what we need. We also have a new HR system on our end that shouts out events and things to see if we can get people to be engaged and the like. But it's really word of mouth, getting people to be passionate and excited about what's happening. And that's really what gets it going over at iProov.
Yeah, I guess for us, we don't have any software or tools to measure employee engagement just now. London councils, local councils generally are struggling financially at the moment. So to invest in new software is a real, treat if you can do that. But I guess one of the things that we do is, first of all, surveys, absolutely correct. Staff surveys is a great way to do that. However, what I would say is an evidence-informed approach to D&I is so crucial, because it strengthens your argument. It strengthens your business case for investment in this area. One of the things that we've been doing is looking at our workforce. So every year we do an annual workforce equalities report, and that will give us a snapshot of who our workforce are. So, do we have 50% women, or 30% Black, Asian and multi-ethnic staff? And what we do is we do a read across pay bands grades. So where are they in terms of seniority? Great, it's so good, we've got a wonderful diverse workforce, but actually where are they in the workforce? And we did this piece of work last year, and it was mind-blowing, because nobody had done this piece of work across London councils. And it was really interesting because it provided us with a baseline. It provided us with the pay gap. What's our gender pay gap? What's our ethnicity pay gap? Gender pay gap, those who live in the UK will know that this is a mandatory, we have to report against it, but ethnicity pay gap is not something that we have to report against. So we did that willfully, voluntarily. And that brought up a number of issues. Now, that becomes our baseline. So when we go out to our staff about, okay, so how do you think things are working or whatever, we are able to get a bit of an idea around what they think are some of the challenges. But at the same time, it now allows us to invest in some of the areas that we know we have the bottleneck. So we found a particular issue around some of our pay bands, which prevented people to go to senior posts. So we invested in a diversity talent program that allowed women in particular, and Black, Asian and multi-ethnic staff, to be able to progress through confidence building, CV writing, getting onto board membership, senior leadership, and those sort of things. And what we've seen is actually a steady progression of those people in the last 6 months into different roles, whether that's in the council or outside the organisation. But it's about career development. So that's just one of the issues that I'm talking about here. But it's a really effective tool, because what you're doing is you're saying, here's our starting point. This is what we need to invest in order to move away from here. And now we're able to start showing what that looks like. What does good look like? This is what good looks like. So I think that's what I would say is one of the most important tools is use your data, get to know your data, make it effective, make it work for you, and sell it.
Fantastic. So we're moving on to the last question before we're going to open the floor for any questions. So if anybody has any questions right now, or if there's something that's brewing in your mind, it would be great to perhaps write it down or start to think about the questions that you can answer. And during the question and answer, we're going to stop recording. So it would be a little bit more organic and people can feel more comfortable to ask questions. So just a heads up. And maybe we could see the audience faces maybe more when we stop recording. So the last question is, can you share some resources that helped you and perhaps would help the people that are joining us today navigate employee engagement? This could be a website, a book, or absolutely anything that you think people would find useful when they start to get into the field of employee engagement. And I believe we could start with Liv.
Oh. Absolutely. So I'm actually going to go ahead and post right now in the chat. So I love this calendar. So this is employers.co.uk. It's their diversity calendar. And it lets you know what events and things are happening throughout the year. So you can really figure out what makes people passionate. We sent out a survey at the beginning of the year where everyone told us what their passions were and days they wanted to see us celebrate and charities they wanted to be involved in and the like. And by seeing that and being able to have a calendar like this, kind of pairing those together and really figuring out what we need to highlight within the workplace has definitely helped. Again, I said earlier, Culture Amp, I'm a big fan. We don't pay for it, but they have great like frameworks and the like, and I always watch their different videos that they have on their site. And then also they send out their annual report, and those reports are so valuable. You know, Deloitte has a great report too, and if, Virgin Media. But if you read them, you're able to find data points which kind of you're like, well, if they're doing this well in tech, how do they do that? Like, what kind of engagement do they have with their employees? And you can kind of change that and adapt that to your workplace. We use Learnably, so it's a great resource where you have the ability to grow yourself. So it's books, it's TED Talks, you can create your own playlists, and having all of that at your fingertips allows people to really figure out what makes them tick, like what their passions are and the like. I know I have bought a plethora of books that we have now in our office that people can borrow. It's like our little library. It's ways that people can educate themselves further and also feel like they have ways that they can be allies to their peers as well. Those are kind of my big ones, at least.
I love the idea of having this library live. I'm going to totally steal that and take that to my workplace. So thank you for that. What a great, and I'm going to say it's my idea. So love it, absolutely love it. Because, you know, I do think that actually people are so well intentioned, but they just don't know where to go for information, and they kind of think, oh, I want to learn about it, but what do we do? I like the idea of a calendar as well. And we have something similar at work, and we sort of we do our events around that diversity calendar. But there is one particular book that I'm going to speak about that absolutely changed my life, and I think, you know, it's the holy grail of an organization, and it's by Amy Edmondson. It's called The Fearless Organization. This book is all about psychological safety and building up psychological safety. So it's not actually about diversity and inclusion, but the way that it is written and the concepts that are mentioned, and some of the most, it's almost like the most obvious things that you would think about, you know, the normal employee contract. When you go to work and you get a contract, you sign it, you think, right, I'm now a member of this organization. But she talks about the psychological contract between yourself and your manager, and what does that mean? And does that, you know, how does that translate around inclusivity and that whole agenda of what a strong inclusive organization looks like? So I would say, if you're going to read one book this year, by the end of the year, make it Amy Edmondson. She is absolutely fantastic. Follow her on LinkedIn. She is wonderful, and she has got, you know, a plethora of articles that come out all the time, but this is the book to read. And you can also get audio, because I heard the audio book and it was just fantastic. So that's the one.
Great, thank you so much for all the information and all the resources that you've shared. We're going to stop recording so that we can start the question and answer portion. So let me just